The calendar notification appeared on my screen at 8:22 a.m., a Tuesday morning in early March. Subject line: Strategic Alignment Discussion. Location: Executive Conference Room. Attendees: Dean Walker. Chief Operations Officer: Dana Reynolds. Human Resources: me. I stared at the invitation for a full minute before the meaning settled in my chest like cold metal. In my 14 years at Silverline Medical Supply, I had watched this exact sequence play out more times than I cared to remember. The vague meeting title: The Private Room. HR included just to observe. It was the corporate equivalent of reading your own termination notice before it was printed. My name is Hazel Quinn. I'm 46 years old. And for over a decade, I've been the person nobody notices until something goes wrong. My official title is Senior Compliance and Risk Officer, the kind of role that makes people's eyes glaze over at company mixers. I review regulatory filings. I verify audit trails. I make sure the documents we submit to federal agencies reflect reality. Not optimism. It's dull work, invisible work. But it's also the reason Silverline has never lost a federal distribution license. I didn't panic when I saw the invite. Panic is for surprises. This had been coming. For months. Leadership had been pushing speed over accuracy, optics over substance. Meetings started ending with phrases like, "We'll clean it up later and let's not slow momentum." Compliance stopped being a safeguard and became an inconvenience. So I took another sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour earlier, minimized the notification, and returned to finishing a shipment variance review no one had asked for. At 8:54, I saved my final file. At 8:56, I backed up my records to my personal archive. At 8:57, I stood up. The walk to the executive conference room took about 90 seconds, long enough to notice conversations dropping into whispers, long enough to see coworkers suddenly absorbed in their screens, long enough to feel myself becoming a warning. I was halfway down the corridor when I heard it. The security badge printer at reception. Once. Pause. Then twice more. 3 badges. Unscheduled. I slowed my pace and glanced toward the lobby. 3 people in dark suits stood at the security desk, 2 men. 1 woman. The woman wore a lanyard with a seal I recognized instantly. Federal. The receptionist's voice trembled as she lifted the phone. "There are federal investigators here," she whispered. "They're asking for Hazel Quinn." I didn't hesitate. Instead of continuing toward the room where I was scheduled to be fired at 9 o'clock, I turned toward the lobby, because at 9:05 a.m., Silverline Medical Supply was no longer in control of anything. How are you really feeling today, if you can? Stand by a window and look outside for 1 full minute. Where are you listening from? Subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. The woman in the dark suit noticed me before I reached the reception desk. Not because I looked anxious, I didn't, but because I was the only person in the building walking toward them instead of away. She studied my face with the quiet precision of someone trained to decide quickly whether a person was about to lie. "Hazel Quinn?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She flipped her badge so I could read it clearly. No flourish, no intimidation. Federal Oversight Division. I'm Special Agent Laura Mendel. These are investigators Ross Carter and Ethan Moore. We're here to conduct an unscheduled compliance review regarding Silverline Medical Supply's recent federal filings. Behind me, the receptionist had already picked up the phone. I could hear her voice tighten as she whispered into the receiver. Management would know within seconds. "That's fine," I said. "What do you need?" Agent Mendel paused. "Not long, just enough to measure me." "We need your compliance documentation," she said. "Audit records, internal correspondence, and your professional assessment of whether the reports submitted over the last 2 quarters are accurate." I nodded once. "Conference room C is available," I said. "Follow me." As we walked, the office felt like it had tilted slightly off balance. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Chairs scraped quietly as people pretended to be busy. No one asked questions. Everyone already knew something was wrong. Inside the room, Mendel took the seat at the head of the table. Carter and Moore sat beside her. I took the chair across from them. She opened a slim folder and slid a single document toward me. "Do you recognize this?" I did instantly. Our most recent compliance certification. Clean formatting. Perfect timestamps. My name printed neatly at the bottom. Yes, I said. That's my signature. Did you personally verify every item in this report before signing it? She asked. I looked at the page for a moment longer than necessary. At the check marks that implied certainty. At the dates that suggested completion. No, I said. Carter leaned forward. Explain. I signed what I was shown, I said calmly, not what actually occurred. Mendel's expression didn't change, but the room sharpened. Before I continue, I added, I need to confirm something. Is this conversation being recorded? Yes, Mendel said. Audio only? Good, I said. Then I want it on record that what I'm about to describe contradicts what my employer reported to your agency. She nodded. Noted. And, I continued, I was scheduled to be terminated this morning. That landed. Terminated, Mendel repeated. Today, yes. 9 a.m. Executive conference room. The three of them exchanged a brief look, the kind professionals share when a pattern becomes clear. Were you given a reason? She asked. Officially, I said. No. And unofficially, I was told I was slowing momentum. Mendel closed the folder. Start from the beginning, she said. Take your time. I took a breath. For the last 4 months, I said, I've been documenting problems management chose to ignore. And that was when the real conversation began. I didn't rush when I reached for my bag. That mattered. People who panic rush. People who improvise over-explain. I did neither. I unzipped the side pocket, placed my laptop on the table, and opened it like this was any other internal review meeting. I can show you, I said. Agent Mendel nodded once. I pulled up a folder labeled Compliance Archive. Inside it were subfolders organized by month. Inside those were documents labeled by date, department, and issue. No commentary, no emotion, just structure. I never rely on memory, I said. Only records. Carter leaned forward slightly as I opened the first file. Temperature variance logs from late summer filled the screen. Automated alerts triggered outside approved storage ranges. Timestamps, sensor IDs, location codes. These alarms were real, I said. The system recorded them. Protocol requires investigation, documentation, and sometimes quarantine. And that didn't happen, Moore asked. No, I said. Management classified them as non-material deviations to avoid shipment delays. I clicked to the next screen. An email chain. My message at the top was short and neutral, citing specific regulatory language. The response below it used softer words acknowledged. Monitoring. No further action needed. That determination isn't theirs to make, Mendel said quietly. I told them that, I replied. Next folder. Training certifications. 12 warehouse employees listed as compliant. Completion dates identical. 2 identical. A software issue locked them out of the final module, I said. I requested a deadline extension. And Carter asked. I opened another email. Hazel. Appreciate the diligence, but we need to keep our metrics clean. Mark, training complete, and we'll remediate next quarter. Mendel's jaw tightened. You refused, she said. Yes. And what happened? I was told I was becoming inflexible, I said. Not collaborative. I moved on. Security audits marked complete without full walkthroughs. Photos reused from previous quarters. Checklists copied forward with updated dates. They didn't fix the issues, I said. They fixed the appearance. The room went quiet. Finally, Mendel closed the laptop herself. Careful, deliberate. Ms. Quinn, she said, do you understand the implications of what you're showing us? Yes, I said. The reports were false. It goes further than that, she replied. This indicates intent. I nodded. And your termination, she continued. When did that start? When I stopped signing, I said. 4 months ago. Moore looked at me. You knew staying would put a target on your back. Yes. Why not leave? He asked. I thought about it. Because if I left, I said, they could claim ignorance. They could say the issues surfaced after I was gone. Mendel held my gaze. But if you stayed, she said. They can't. No, I said. They can't. She reached for her phone. Then we need to make something very clear to your leadership, she said. I didn't ask what she meant. She looked up anyway. Any attempt to terminate you now, she said calmly, would be considered retaliation. She paused. And retaliation, she added, is a federal offense. The room felt suddenly very small. At this point, do you feel something is about to happen? Agent Mendel stood before I did. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't hurry. She simply gathered her phone, her folder, and looked at the door like someone who already knew how the next hour would unfold. Stay here, she said to me. We'll be back. The door closed softly behind them. I sat alone at the table, hands folded, listening to the faint hum of the ventilation system. Somewhere down the hall, phones were ringing, chairs scraped, footsteps moved faster than they had 10 minutes earlier. At 9:03, my phone vibrated. An email notification from Dana Reynolds. HR subject schedule update Hazel. The meeting scheduled for this morning has been postponed. Please remain at your workstation until further notice. I didn't reply. At 9:04, voices rose in the hallway. Not shouting, just the strained politeness people use when authority enters a room without asking. At 9:05, the door opened. Agent Mendel returned with Investigator Carter behind her, and between them stood Dean Walker. He looked exactly the way men do when control slips away too quickly for denial to catch up. Jaw tight, smile forced, eyes darting. Hazel, he said, as if this were a coincidence. I didn't realize you were occupied. Mendel didn't give him time to continue. Mr. Walker, she said, we need to speak with you regarding Silverline Medical Supply's federal compliance filings. Dean straightened. Of course, I'm happy to cooperate. You will, she said. But first, I want to be clear about something. She gestured toward me. Ms. Quinn is a cooperating witness. Any employment action taken against her while this review is ongoing will be treated as retaliation. Dean blinked. Once, that won't be necessary, he said quickly. There's been a misunderstanding. Mendel's expression didn't move. Good, she said. Then cancel the termination. Dean swallowed. There was no termination, just a conversation. Then you won't mind confirming that in writing? She replied. Silence. Carter opened his folder. We'll also need immediate access to your operations managers, training records, and security audit documentation. Dean's voice dropped. This is highly disruptive. So is falsifying federal records, Mendel said. Dean looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time, I saw it land not anger, not betrayal, but calculation. He had assumed I would leave quietly. He had assumed paperwork could absorb blame. He had assumed time was on his side. He hadn't accounted for documentation. Conference room A is available, Dean said tightly. Excellent, Mendel replied. We'll be using it for the rest of the day. As they turned to leave, Mendel paused. Oh, she added. One more thing. Dean stopped. This review, she said calmly, is no longer routine. She met his eyes. It's escalated, and just like that, the meeting meant to end my career became the reason it couldn't be touched at all. By the time I returned to my desk, the office no longer felt like a workplace. It felt paused. People still moved, but carefully. Conversations slipped behind closed doors. Managers who normally filled the hallways with noise stayed seated, typing messages that never seemed to end. The calendar invite for my termination was gone. No explanation, no reschedule. Just erased, as if removing it could undo intent. Dana from HR passed my cubicle without meeting my eyes. Her shoulders were tight. Her phone clutched in her hand like it might ring again at any moment. A short while later, 2 investigators escorted the head of warehouse operations toward conference room A. He didn't argue. He didn't speak. He carried nothing with him, as if that might make what was happening less real. I opened my inbox. There was a new message from Dean Walker. Subject: quick check-in Hazel. Let's reconnect later today. There seems to be some confusion that we should clear up together. I archived it without replying. Another email followed. This one from accounting. No subject line. Just a single sentence. Thank you for not backing down. I stared at it longer than I expected. Around me, requests moved quietly through the building. System access logs, training records, badge histories. Each one felt small on its own. Together, they tightened the structure of the investigation. I watched it unfold the way you watch a storm arrive, not dramatic, not sudden, but unavoidable once the pressure changes. Agent Mendel eventually stopped by my desk. "Walk with me," she said. We stood near the windows overlooking the parking lot. "This is no longer about inaccurate filings," she said. "We're seeing signs of deliberate override." "That matches what I saw," I replied. She nodded. "From this point forward, your role doesn't change. If anyone pressures you, alters your responsibilities, or asks you to reframe documentation, you contact me immediately. I will." She studied me for a moment. "You did the right thing," she said. Not kindly, not dramatically, just factually. When she walked away, I didn't feel relief. I felt something steadier. Because the truth was no longer something I had to carry alone. It was documented, preserved, shared. And once that happens, power stops being loud. It becomes procedural. Don't leave yet, the next part is where everything starts to shift. By the end of the day, Silverline stopped pretending this was temporary. Conference Room A became sealed territory. The glass walls were no longer transparent, so much as symbolic. Everyone could see the investigators inside. But no one knew what was being said. That uncertainty spread faster than any rumor ever had. Entire teams were told to pause work. Not stop, pause. A careful word, a legal word. I stayed at my desk. Not because anyone told me to, but because leaving would have made me visible in the wrong way. Staying made me part of the structure. Witnesses don't flee scenes. They document them. Dean Walker didn't come near me again. Instead, he sent intermediaries. First Dana from HR, hovering too long by the printer. Then a senior manager asking if I needed anything. Then silence. Silence is what follows when people realize every interaction might be logged. Late in the afternoon, an internal notice went out. All document retention protocols are now in effect. No files are to be altered, removed, or deleted until further notice. I read it twice. Someone had tried, or had been about to. Agent Mendel returned near closing time, this time with a small folder in her hand. "We're escalating," she said quietly. "This review is now formal." I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. "We'll be issuing preservation orders tonight." She continued. "Phones, laptops, internal messaging systems, everything." Dean knows I asked. He does now. She hesitated, then added, "You should expect pushback, not overt, subtle, clarifying questions," I said. "Requests to rephrase, suggestions to add context." "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." I nodded. "I won't." "I know," she replied, when she left. The building emptied quickly. People didn't linger. No one wanted to be remembered as the last person seen talking to the wrong colleague. I packed my bag slowly. As I stood, my screen flickered with a new message request, an internal chat I hadn't used in months. It was from Dean. "We need to talk, privately." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Agent Mendel's address. Then I shut my laptop. Walking out of the building felt different than it had that morning. Not lighter, not heavier, clearer. Because containment isn't chaos. It's the moment after chaos is acknowledged, when systems stop improvising and start protecting themselves. And for the first time in months, the company wasn't trying to outrun the truth. It was being forced to sit with it. Tomorrow, the questions would get sharper, and so would the consequences. The next morning, the building felt quieter than it should have. Not empty, restrained. People arrived on time, but didn't linger in the lobby. Conversations ended when someone unfamiliar walked by. Doors closed more gently than usual, like everyone had learned the sound carried farther now. I logged in and found my access unchanged. That mattered. If they were going to push me out, it would have been subtle by now, a permissions error, a reassignment, a calendar reshuffle framed as temporary support. None of that happened. Instead, everything stayed exactly the same, which meant they were thinking. Around mid-morning, the first interview requests went out, one by one. Names disappeared from the floor and didn't return for hours. When they did, faces looked different, not panicked. Calculating. I was called in just after lunch. Conference room B this time, smaller, no windows. Agent Mendel was there, along with Carter. A recorder sat on the table between us, already running. "This isn't a repeat," she said. "We're clarifying." I nodded. They asked about timelines. Who knew what, and when? Who had authority to override? Who benefited from delays being hidden? I answered carefully, not defensively, facts only. When they asked about Dean, I didn't speculate. "I can tell you what he signed," I said. And what he didn't question, that was enough. When I returned to my desk, there was a new message waiting, not from Dean, from legal. "Hazel, please refrain from sharing interpretations. Stick to factual descriptions only." I read it once, then forwarded it. An hour later, legal sent a follow-up apologizing for confusion. By late afternoon, it was clear the strategy had shifted. No one challenged me, no one corrected me, no one asked me to reconsider language. Instead, people started asking for copies, old reports, old emails, just in case. They weren't trying to change the record anymore. They were trying to understand it. Before I left, I received one last message, this time from someone junior in operations, someone who had never spoken to me directly before. I didn't think it mattered until now. "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Some realizations arrived too late to answer. As I shut down my computer, I felt the pressure settle into something steady. Not fear, not relief. Alignment. Because when systems are forced into truth, they don't explode, they reorganize. Tomorrow, there would be more interviews, more documents, more names attached to decisions they'd hoped would stay abstract. And somewhere in that process, accountability would stop being theoretical. It would become personal. The board meeting wasn't announced. It didn't need to be. By mid-morning, everyone knew something was happening on the top floor. Elevators stopped there longer than usual. Assistants moved with purpose. The kind of purpose that comes from instructions that can't be forwarded or summarized. I stayed where I was. At this stage, proximity wasn't power. Accuracy was. Just before noon, Agent Mendel asked me to join them again. Not for questioning this time context. The boardroom was colder than the rest of the building. Over-air-conditioned. Over-prepared. Half the seats were filled by people who hadn't set foot in the office for years. They looked polished, expensive, slightly annoyed. Dean Walker sat near the end of the table. He didn't look at me. Mendel didn't waste time. She laid out the findings without adjectives. No accusations, no narrative. Just sequences, dates, approvals, overrides, submissions. Each one linked to a name. Each name attached to authority. When she finished, the room stayed silent longer than felt polite. Finally, one of the board members spoke. "Is this criminal?" he asked. Mendel met his eyes. "It's under review." Another asked. "Is the company at risk?" "Yes," she said. "But cooperation matters." That word landed hard. Cooperation. I was dismissed before discussion turned inward. That, too, was intentional. Witnesses don't stay to watch decisions form. They preserve distance. Back at my desk, an internal announcement appeared. Dean Walker is stepping aside, effective immediately. An interim operations lead will be appointed. Stepping aside. Language does a lot of work when consequences are still loading. By afternoon, requests flooded in. The board wanted everything I had. Not summaries, originals, context, timestamps. I sent them what I'd already sent the investigators. No more, no less. Late in the day, legal called. This time, the tone had changed. "We'd like to formalize your role in remediation," they said. "Expanded authority, direct reporting." I listened. Then I said, "Put it in writing." They did. I didn't sign it yet. Walking out that evening, I felt the building recalibrate around me, not because I'd gained power, but because the system had identified where truth lived. Tomorrow, there would be fallout. Press, external counsel, numbers recalculated with honesty instead of optimism. But today, the important thing had already happened. The people who thought this was a paperwork issue learned it was a governance issue. And governance, once questioned, never returns to silence. The aftermath didn't feel like victory, it felt like administration. Outside counsel took over entire sections of the building, quietly and without ceremony. New faces appeared in meetings. New language replaced the old shortcuts. Words like alignment and efficiency disappeared, replaced by phrases that sounded heavier and moved slower. I accepted the remediation role once the terms were finalized, not because I wanted a title, but because leaving the work unfinished would have meant letting someone else decide where accuracy ended and convenience began. My first directive was brief and non-negotiable. Nothing moves unless it's verified. Shipments paused. Certifications were rechecked line by line. Training modules were reopened and reassigned, even to people who insisted they'd already done this. The system didn't grind to a halt. It recalibrated. Some people resented that. Others looked relieved. The ones who'd been nervous for months stopped whispering and started asking questions out loud. The ones who'd relied on ambiguity grew quieter by the day. Midweek, I was asked to sit in on a briefing with federal counsel, not to explain, just to confirm. Yes, I said. No, I said. That was never completed, I said. I documented that concern, I said. Every answer stripped away a layer of interpretation. And interpretation had been the last shelter some decisions were hiding behind. By Thursday, the interim CEO issued a company-wide statement. We are cooperating fully with regulators. We are correcting deficiencies. Accountability will follow. No names were mentioned. They didn't need to be. Dean Walker's access badge was deactivated later that afternoon. No announcement, no escort, just absence. His name quietly removed from distribution lists, like a footnote no longer relevant to the current draft. Someone asked me if I felt vindicated. I didn't. Vindication suggests emotion, satisfaction, closure. This wasn't that. This was what happens when systems finally stop arguing with reality. Late that evening, Agent Mendel called. There will be consequences, she said. Some will be public, some won't. I expected that. I replied. Your cooperation changed the trajectory. She added. You should know that. When I ended the call, I stayed at my desk longer than usual. The office was nearly empty. Cleaning staff moved quietly down the hall. Outside, the parking lot lights cast long, even shadows. Nothing about the room had changed. Same desk, same chair, same window. But the noise was gone. Because once the truth is documented, preserved, and shared, it stops needing a voice. It doesn't argue. It doesn't defend itself. It just waits. And eventually, everything else has to adjust around it. Months later, the building felt ordinary again. That was how I knew the worst of it was over. Routine returned slowly, meetings scheduled weeks in advance, conversations that drifted instead of snapping shut when someone walked by. The work regained its rhythm, not rushed, not defensive, just precise. The investigations continued without me in the room. That was intentional. My role had shifted from witness to architect. I rebuilt systems. I rewrote protocols. I hired people who understood that compliance wasn't friction, it was memory. Some names never came back, others stayed. Quieter now, more careful with certainty. I never received an apology from Dean Walker. I didn't expect one. Accountability doesn't always arrive as remorse. Sometimes it arrives as removal, one afternoon, while reviewing a final remediation report. I noticed something small but telling. A checklist item had been flagged incomplete, not overridden, not rationalized, just marked honestly and routed for follow-up. I paused longer than necessary. That line meant more than any statement ever could, because the real damage hadn't been the false filings. It was the habit of pretending things were finished when they weren't. That habit was gone. When Agent Mendel called for the last time, her tone was lighter. "The case is closing," she said. "Civil penalties finalized. No further action required from you." "Thank you," I replied. "For what it's worth," she added. "This is how it's supposed to work. People don't see it often." After the call, I shut down my computer and looked around my office. It was still modest, still quiet, still functional. I liked that. The story people would tell about this would be simplified. A firing avoided, an investigation triggered, consequences delivered. But the truth was smaller and steadier. I stayed, I documented. I refused to trade accuracy for comfort. And when the moment came, that was enough. Not because I fought, but because I didn't move, in the end. That's what systems respond to, not anger, not spectacle, consistency. Because when the truth is written down and left untouched, it doesn't need defending, it just waits. And eventually, everything else rearranges itself around it. Living through this taught me something simple and hard at the same time. Truth doesn't need to be loud to be strong. It just needs to be written down and held steady. I wasn't brave, I was consistent. And that changed everything. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Before you move on, do one small thing for yourself tonight. Step away from your screen and sit somewhere quiet for 5 minutes. No agenda. Where are you listening from right now? I'd love to know. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, a like, a share, or a subscribe truly helps this channel grow.